I think it shows the desperation of parts of the psychiatric profession to maintain the public's belief that depression has a biological origin. Both the physical and the psychological withdrawal symptoms are a consequence of physical changes in the brain. All these millions of people have been started on ineffective and harmful substances at their instigation. The profession has allowed itself to go along with the pharmaceutical industry line. It's allowed itself to be bought.
Welcome to the Visionary podcast, where we discuss science, medicine, physical health, and mental well-being. This is a bit of a dramatic question, but are you advocating for psychiatrists not to use drugs in the field, or do you think it's more useful for them not to use drugs?
So, no, I'm not advocating for that. I think that some drugs have useful effects in some situations, but we don't understand the effects of drugs well enough because we've had this idea that what they're doing is targeting underlying mechanisms, and therefore we haven't shown enough interest in the sorts of alterations that they produce and how those alterations might or might not be useful. I'll give you a couple of examples where I think drug treatment can be helpful and why. So someone who is having a manic episode, someone who we might say has bipolar disorder and suffers from manic episodes, often they will not sleep for long periods of time, and they'll be over-aroused and disinhibited, and as a consequence do silly things. And they often therefore end up in hospital or picked up by the police. In that situation, giving a drug that reduces arousal and helps people to sleep and calms people down is a useful thing to do. It's probably not good for the body, let alone the mind, to be, constantly hyper aroused and hyper alert like that and not getting any sleep. So that's a situation where I think a drug can be useful. It's not because it's correcting the cause of their mania or their bipolar disorder. It's because sedative effects are useful. Drugs with sedative effects are useful in that situation when someone is hyper-aroused and not sleeping. Another situation where drugs, I think, are useful is when someone is acutely psychotic and preoccupied with unusual ideas and beliefs and maybe hearing voices or having other strange experiences. Drugs that we call antipsychotics, but we used to call major tranquilizers, again, help to tranquilize and calm people, but they don't just send people off to sleep. These are drugs that seem to be able to dial down neurological activity without just sending people to sleep. And one of the consequences is they again induce a state of emotional indifference, and people care less about their experiences. They're less invested in them. They're less interested in their delusional ideas and psychotic experiences. And again, if someone is really, in the throes of an acute and intense psychotic episode, dampening it down in that way with these drugs can be useful. So I think I'm trying to illustrate that we really need to understand in a much more sophisticated way than we do at the moment the effects that these drugs have in order to match them up and to the situations that people are experiencing. But we also need to acknowledge that they are drugs, they are changing the normal state of our brain chemistry, and particularly, and if you do that over a long period of time in particular, there will often be negative consequences. We know this from people drinking significant amounts of alcohol for long periods of time. It's not good for you generally. And so, of course, we need to bear that in mind when we're using the drugs, plus all the other negative effects that they can have, adverse effects that they can have.
You talk about long-term use. Of course, if psychiatrists put SSRIs in the framework of disease-centered model, you will continue to take the drug, because if you don't, well, the illness will come back. So this will automatically lead to long-term use.
Yeah, and it also leads to long-term use because people become afraid that because they've been told they've got a chemical imbalance, or they've come to believe they've got a chemical imbalance, they therefore don't think they can stop the drug, and therefore they go on using it. If they try and stop, they may well experience some withdrawal symptoms. Because those symptoms are often emotional, they may think they're having a relapse, and then they end up taking the drug for long periods of time. And I've shown in some recent research that people who believe that they have a brain chemical imbalance or some other biological abnormality are more likely to take antidepressants for longer, and that's regardless of how severe their symptoms are.
All right, so whether I respond positively or negatively to SSRIs, surely I shouldn't be taking them forever. At some point, I should stop, right? I have come across the works of psychiatrist Mark Holowitz, who said he almost died coming off antidepressants because of severe withdrawal effects. He has an article in the New York Times, we'll put the link in the description, in which he said thousands, perhaps millions of people who try to quit antidepressant drugs experience stinging withdrawal symptoms that last for months to years. Insomnia, surges of anxiety, even so-called brain zaps. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes,
brain
yes.
zaps?
These feelings of like having an electrical shock in your brain. Yeah.
Sensations of electric shock in the brain. What do your patients report about withdrawal symptoms? And I want to know the difference. I mean, if I take antidepressants for 2 years, for example, would I get more severe withdrawal effects than if I take them for 6 months? Would it make a difference?
It's probable that if you've just taken antidepressants for 6 months, you won't get really severe or significant withdrawal symptoms. But antidepressants do differ actually, and some antidepressants seem to be able to induce some degree of withdrawal symptoms even after quite short-term use, particularly the SNRI antidepressants. That's the serotonin and noradrenaline reuptaker antidepressants. The individual drugs are venlafaxine and duloxetine. For some reason we don't completely understand, although it's probably in part related to the fact that they have a short onset of action and are quite rapidly excreted from the body as well. They seem to cause withdrawal symptoms more frequently and withdrawal symptoms that are more severe.
Yeah. Is the implication here that SSRIs might cause physical dependency similar to maybe addictive drugs?
So absolutely, they do cause physical dependency, and these withdrawal symptoms, both the physical and the psychological withdrawal symptoms, are a consequence of physical changes in the brain. So, if you're taking these drugs for a long time, just as you said when you were talking about your antihistamine, how you, after taking that for a while, you found it then difficult to get to sleep when you stopped it, and had what seemed like a withdrawal state. What was happening there and what is happening in people who are using antidepressants for long periods of time is the brain is adapting to the presence of the drug. It's basically trying to neutralize it, trying to cancel out its effects. So then if you take the drug away, the brain is in a different state, and the drug that was compensating for these changes that have occurred is no longer there, and therefore you get withdrawal symptoms. And those symptoms can include anxiety, panic, fear, feeling very emotional, tearfulness, irritability, low mood, lots of emotional symptoms, as well as physical symptoms, as well as dizziness, nausea, headache, and these characteristic brain zaps. So this definitely is a state of physical dependence. Now, there's a lot of confusion in this area. We've known that antidepressants cause this state for a long time, actually, but it was always underplayed because they are not drugs that give people a buzz or make people feel particularly nice or high, and therefore people don't want to sort of keep increasing their dose or go out and try and, buy illicit stocks of antidepressants on street corners, as they might have done with Valium and the benzodiazepines that have effects that are more commonly experienced as being pleasant and desirable. So they're not drugs of abuse in that way. People, not going to be, shoveling them back to get a quick high. That doesn't mean that they don't cause dependence, and cause dependence at the doses and levels that they are prescribed at.
Yes. So I experience these withdrawal symptoms and I struggle. When I go back to my GP or psychiatrist, what will they do? Will they instruct me to go back to antidepressants again?
So we think that what's been happening very often is that people stop taking their antidepressants, experience withdrawal symptoms, and either assume or are told by their doctors that they're having a relapse, are put back on the medication, and then they feel then they can never come off it. They feel that they've failed to get off it. It's been demonstrated to them that they need it forever.
Hi, I'm Hala, your host today. If you're enjoying what you see, please hit that lovely subscribe button. It will mean a lot to us. Or maybe a small podcast now, but with your support, we can build this channel together, one step at a time. Thank you so much for being part of it. I think it's time for us to, if you could please give us a small guide or a long guide on how to come off antidepressants responsibly and safely.
Yeah. So linking back to the previous point, the first thing that people need to understand is that they may experience withdrawal symptoms when they come off antidepressants. It's really important that they understand that the emotions that they have are not necessarily a relapse of their previous problem, but are very likely to be due to the fact that they're reducing the drug and their brain is having to get used to lower doses of the drug. So it's really important to educate people about the possibility of withdrawal symptoms, and those will be more likely to occur if people have been using the drugs for a long time, for years rather than a few months. So that's the first important thing. And if people have been using drugs for just a short period of time, they could try reducing the dose a bit, see if they get any withdrawal symptoms. If they don't, they could carry on and they'll probably be able to come off it relatively easily. If they've been using the drug for longer periods of time, certainly if, over a year or a couple of years in particular, they need to be much more careful. So I would suggest that people start by making a small reduction, see if they get any negative effects, if they experience any withdrawal symptoms by making a small reduction. If they don't, they could continue at the same pace. But the important thing is that people, particularly people who've been on drugs, these medications for long periods of time, the important thing is that they slow up the rate at which they reduce as they reduce the dose. That's what it means to reduce in a hyperbolic way. That's the work of Mark Horowitz has emphasized how drugs are excreted from the body in a hyperbolic sort of exponential way like that, rather than in a linear way.
Okay.
So the reductions that you make when you get down to low doses have a much bigger impact than the reductions at higher doses. So when you get down to low doses, you need to reduce very, very gradually and very carefully. And the reason why this is important is because some people who come off these drugs suddenly or too fast seem to get into a really terrible, protracted withdrawal state. Some people refer to this not as a withdrawal state, but as a state of brain injury, as the consequence of a brain injury. We don't know, what's causing this, but it's definitely related to coming off these drugs. It happens to people who come off antidepressants and benzodiazepines in particular, possibly with other drugs, but those are the two that it's been most consistently reported. And people in this state report ongoing problems with fatigue, brain fog, muscle weakness, muscle twitching, anxiety and emotional problems. So and these symptoms can be really significant and debilitating. You know, people have to stop work or cut down on their work. They can lead to the breakup of relationships. So it's really can be a devastating state to end up in. Although I think people do gradually get better, even it can take years for people to get better, to recover from this state. So that's why it's so important that people do withdraw very carefully and not go too fast, especially down, you know, at those lower doses.
Yes, on a practical level, I appreciate that this subject is it's more complicated than this. Where do I go for a thorough, detailed guide on how to stop antidepressants? Is there a reliable source for this?
So the best place to go would be the Maudsley Deprescribing Guidelines, which have been written by my colleague Mark Horowitz, who specialises in how to help people withdraw from these drugs in a safe manner. They're very comprehensive. They're written for practitioners rather than lay people, but they have lots of very useful tables in them and advice on how to reduce doses slowly, how to get small doses when you might not be able to get tablets that are very low dose, how to convert to liquids and things.
So when I get tablets, simply ask my GP that I've decided to do this and that. Can I have a lower dose, please? Would that work?
So the trouble is with some tablets, there aren't very low doses. So you may have to convert to a liquid preparation, or you might have to resort to cutting tablets up or dissolving them. There are various ways of doing it to try and achieve small doses. So the Maudsley Deprescribing Guidelines is has the most detailed help and advice. The Royal College of Psychiatrists website has some quite helpful advice on stopping antidepressants. It's not as detailed, but it does set out some of these principles quite well. And it was also written by Dr. Horowitz. So
we'll put both links in the description. Yeah. We touched on your paper that in 2022, you and your colleagues published a paper titled The Serotonin Theory of Depression, a systematic umbrella review of the evidence that was in the scientific journal Molecule Psychiatry. It's very hard to find the link of that paper, but I found it and we'll put a link in the description. When this paper came out, it was reported worldwide. It was read by 1 million people. Did you receive any valid, sensible criticism of this paper?
We received a lot of criticism and a lot of angry responses. And the first responses were, and these were from psychiatrists, generally. And the first criticisms were, we knew this all along. Why did you bother doing this? It's not important. And then the next criticisms were, you didn't do it properly, and there is evidence after all. So completely contradictory messages. Of course, when you do a review like this, you're making lots of decisions about what to include, what to exclude, how to evaluate the data. And you can always make different decisions. And so, we were criticised for using certain quality scales and how we applied them, and for not including some studies and including other studies. I am confident that review was a high quality review, partly because we had several people in the team who are experts in doing systematic reviews, and we followed the most up-to-date guidance on conducting these sorts of reviews. And we also mimicked several other high-quality reviews that have used the similar methodology. So I'm confident that it was a good quality review, but lots of sort of minor trivial criticisms were made, most of which actually were completely inaccurate. They accused us of missing studies that we hadn't missed, or including studies that we shouldn't have included but actually fulfilled our inclusion criteria.
Yeah, I read online that some psychiatrists try to revive other biochemical explanations, like focusing on new brain targets or calling the chemical imbalance idea a mere metaphor. What do you make of this resilience?
So I think it shows the desperation of parts of the psychiatric profession to maintain the public's belief that depression has a biological origin. I think although they know full well that that has not been demonstrated, they want people to keep on believing it. I mean, I was told by certain colleagues of mine that I should not be publicising this paper, I should not be talking to the public, I should not be talking to the press, that it might put people off getting help and people wouldn't necessarily be able to properly understand the information. So I think there was a concerted effort by sections of the psychiatric profession to shut down any discussion that might encourage people to question the dogma that they had been led to believe, that depression is caused by some sort of brain mechanism. Because I think it would just be too awful to contemplate that, all these millions of people have been started on ineffective and harmful substances at their instigation.
Yeah. I think it's just part of human nature to hold on to our stories. We build the whole identity around stories. But that's what medical doctors do. They prescribe medications. They don't talk to you out of an illness. They don't prescribe breath work. They find pharma solutions. It's part of how they function, which is fine in most cases. But in this case,
I think the profession really needs to look at itself, though, because what has happened here is the public and the profession have been misled by the pharmaceutical industry. And the profession has allowed itself to go along with the pharmaceutical industry line. It's allowed itself to be bought with, all the money that was dished out in the 90s and the noughties at psychiatric conferences and to psychiatric key opinion leaders, and in providing education for GPs and psychiatrists. It has allowed itself to be misled, to be taken along with this myth that the industry created, that there was evidence for a chemical imbalance in depression.
Yes.
And the profession really needs to, I think, sit up and realise that it needs to guard against that sort of situation. It needs to stop it happening in the future. It needs to have mechanisms whereby it can be more critical of what the pharmaceutical industry is telling it.
Yeah. But medical doctors are scientists at the end of the day, and science evolves. Yeah. We know new things now, today. I think someone here in this podcast mentioned that the scientific cycle is 28 days. Every 28 days, things change. Yeah, because we have research, we have clinical trials, and we're human beings with evolving brains. But patients assume that drugs are proven to work. Do you see this as a betrayal of public trust?
Yes, I do, because we've known for a long time that the serotonin theory of depression was not supported by evidence. As the people said who were commenting on our paper in 2022, this is not surprising. We've known it for a long time. That's true. We have known for a long time that this is not an established fact, and we allowed people to go on believing that it was. And we've also known for a long time, although people still push back on this a lot, that antidepressants really don't have any significant beneficial effects.
Well, it's one thing for a commercial entity to follow profit at the expense of whatever. Another thing for many medical doctors, and I quote you again here, perfectly happy for people to go on believing in the fiction of the chemical imbalance. SSRIs became, when I researched this, they became $1 billion blockbuster drugs kind of thing with a promise of an easy fix. Is money that powerful?
Well, I think this story illustrates that it is. And it's a similar story to the opioid crisis in America, where, a drug company saw an opening to make profit, managed to persuade large sections of the medical profession that its new drug, although it was an opioid, didn't make people dependent like other opioids did, wasn't going to cause the same problems. And of course it did. It did make people dependent, and we ended up with the opioid crisis. And it was that company's money that persuaded the medical profession, to go along with the promotion of this drug.